I would never in a million years believe that he would do anything like this, to himself even, or to anyone else.
It is just before 6 o'clock in the morning, a Sunday in April, in a corner of Shreveport, Louisiana called Cedar Grove, the kind of neighborhood where the houses sit close together and everybody more or less knows everybody. Most of the street is still asleep. Then a 911 call comes in.
About 5:55 a.m. on Sunday morning, the caller stated that they were on top of a house. The suspect was inside and that a male had been shot.
A woman is on the roof of a house. She is not alone up there. There are children with her, and she is telling the dispatcher that the man inside the home has a gun and that he has already started shooting.
You got one dead child on the roof with multiple inside. The female saying there's 9 subjects that live inside the residence, saying he may have shot them all.
Minutes later, a relative's phone rings. On the other end is a woman who has just escaped that same house. What she says is only 7 words long. It is the kind of sentence a person spends the rest of their life trying to unhear. He done shot the kids. He killed the kids. By the time the sun is fully up over Shreveport that morning, 8 children will be dead. 5 girls and 3 boys, the youngest just 3 years old. 7 of them belonged to the man with the gun. The 8th was family too. This is not a story about a stranger. There is no intruder here, no mystery figure in the dark. The danger that came through those doors lived inside the family, and in the weeks that followed, the most painful question the city of Shreveport had to sit with was not who did this. It was how many people saw it coming. Before we talk about the man, we are going to talk about them, because they were here first, and they deserve to be more than a number in a headline. The Caddo Parish Coroner's Office would eventually release all 8 names. Say them slowly. Shamar Elkins, she was 3. Shayla Elkins, she was 5. Kayla Pugh, 6. Layla Pugh, 7. And Markaden Pugh, 10. Braylon Snow, 5. Kadarian Snow, 6. And Soraya Snow, 11. 7 of those 8 children were fathered by the same man, Shamar Elkins. They came from 2 relationships, children he shared with his wife, Shaniqua Pugh, and children he shared with his ex-wife, Christina Snow. The 8th child, 10-year-old Markaden, was not his at all. Markaden was the son of Shamar's brother-in-law, a cousin to the others, who had simply been in the house that night, the way cousins so often are. A sleepover, a full house, children scattered across beds and couches and floors, the ordinary chaos of a family with a lot of kids in it. That is the detail that has stayed with so many people in Cedar Grove.
The kids played in the yard every evening. Just yesterday evening, he was sitting on the porch, and I waved at him, he waved back. The children were in the yard playing, and I just come in the house, and then this morning, we woke up to all of this.
These were not children gathered for anything unusual. It was an ordinary weekend. They went to sleep in a house full of their own people, surrounded by the relatives who were supposed to keep them safe. To understand what happened, you need to understand the geography of this family, because it did not all happen in one place. There were 2 homes that morning, a few minutes' drive apart, one on Harrison Street, one on West 79th Street. Investigators would later describe the events as spanning 4 separate crime scenes, a single hour of violence that moved across the neighborhood like a weather front. And at the center of all of it was a 31-year-old father who, by every outward measure, looked like a man holding his life together. Shamar Elkins was 31 years old. He worked for UPS. Years earlier, he had served in the Louisiana Army National Guard, a signal and fire support specialist from 2013 to 2020. He was never deployed. He left the service as a private. On paper, a working father in his 30s, a veteran, a man with a job and a house full of kids. But the paper was never the whole story. Elkins had a past that should have mattered a great deal, especially when it came to one specific thing.
Elkins left the Louisiana Army National Guard in 2020 after they say he served for 7 years as a private.
In 2019, he was arrested on 2 charges: illegal use of a weapon and carrying a firearm on school property. According to the police report, Elkins said another person had pointed a gun at him from a car and that he had fired 5 rounds back at that car as it drove away. The problem was where he fired them. It happened less than 300 feet from Caddo Magnet High School. The shots traveled in the direction of the school while children were outside playing. He pleaded guilty that October to the illegal weapons charge. The second charge was dropped. He was placed on probation for 18 months. 3 years before that, in 2016, he'd been convicted of driving while intoxicated. Remember that 2019 weapons conviction. Under Louisiana law, a person convicted of illegal use of a weapon is barred from possessing a firearm for at least 10 years, which means that on the morning of April 19th, 2026, Shamar Elkins should not have been able to legally hold a gun at all. Neither, as we will see, should the man who supplied it. But to understand the why, we have to go back further than the criminal record, back to the beginning. Shamar's start in life was hard. His mother, Mahalia, gave birth to him as a teenager and, by her own account, gave him away because she was struggling with a crack cocaine dependency she could not control. He was raised by a family friend named Betty Walker. He reconnected with his biological mother years later, in the mid-2000s. It is the kind of childhood that leaves marks a person carries quietly into adulthood, into their own marriages, into their own parenting. And by 2023, those marks were showing. This is the part of the story that is the hardest to hear. Not because it is graphic, because it is so clear in hindsight. Betty Walker, the woman who raised him, would later tell reporters about a conversation from 2023. Shamar's soon-to-be wife, Shaniqua, had said she was thinking about leaving him and taking her children with her.
He did not want to be divorced. He wanted to be married and raise his children. He didn't want anybody else to raise his children.
According to Walker, Shamar's response was a sentence, a flat, specific, terrible sentence. "I'll kill you, my kids, and myself." Sit with that, because it is not vague. It is not, "I'll lose it." It is a complete plan, stated out loud, 3 years before it happened, naming the exact victims: his wife, his children, himself. Then, in February of 2026, just 2 months before that April morning, Shamar Elkins attempted to take his own life. Afterward, by Walker's account, he began taking medication and went to counseling at a Veterans Affairs hospital. Another relative said he checked in for a mental health evaluation and stayed roughly a week and a half before he was released. 2 weeks before the shooting, on April 5th, he called his biological mother's home. He spoke to his stepfather. He said he was having dark thoughts, including thoughts of suicide. And then, before he hung up, he said something that reads now like a man narrating his own ending. Some people don't come back from their demons. And then, he hung up. The marriage was ending. Shamar and Shaniqua were separating. A relative later said the couple was actually due in court the very next day.
She didn't necessarily express it to me, but I do know that she came to me and she asked me about helping her properly file for divorce. And to my understanding, prior to this incident, they were scheduled to go to court on Monday, which was the next day.
April 20th. His brother said Shamar had been distraught about the marriage falling apart, and that Shamar told him plainly, "Bro, I don't want to lose my wife." So here is what we know was true in the days before. A documented threat to kill his wife and children, years old. A recent suicide attempt. A phone call about demons. A divorce reaching its final stage. A court date on the calendar.
Our nation saw its deadliest mass shooting in years when a Louisiana man...
After the shooting, Shreveport police said they were not aware of any prior domestic violence issues with this family. And that statement sits at the center of everything that followed, because the people closest to Shamar Elkins clearly were aware. The signs were not hidden in some private journal no one could have read. They were spoken out loud, to family members, to a hospital, over the phone. A Washington Post analysis put it bluntly in its headline: "This was a man who masked his rage before the rampage." The warning was there. The question Shreveport is still asking is why nothing in the system was built to catch it. We are going to walk through that morning, the way investigators reconstructed it, calmly, in order. There is no need to dramatize it. The timeline does that on its own. It began at the home on Harrison Street. At around 5:55 a.m., the first 911 call came in. Inside the Harrison Street house was Christina Snow, Shamar's ex-wife, the mother of 3 of his children. What happened to her there is almost impossible to comprehend that she survived it. Christina Snow was shot 9 times. 9. And she lived. As she lay critically wounded, she managed to tell responders the most urgent thing she could, that the gunman had taken her 3 children and he had fled. Police arrived at Harrison Street at 6:01 a.m., but Shamar Elkins was already gone, driving the short distance to the second house, the one on West 79th Street. Inside that home were 8 children, and, investigators believe, when Elkins came through the door, every one of them was asleep. There were also 2 adult women in the house, Shaniqua, his wife and the mother of 4 of his children, and Shaniqua's sister, Keosha Pugh, who lived there with her 12-year-old daughter. We are not going to describe what happened in that house. You do not need the details to understand the magnitude of it, and the children deserve better than to be reduced to the manner of their deaths. What you need to know is the human shape of it. A neighbor 2 doors down had a security camera. It captured a figure running. It captured the sound of gunfire carrying across the quiet street. And it captured an ordinary Sunday morning being torn apart in real time. A second 911 call came in at 6:07. By 6:08, the suspect had a name, Shamar Elkins. And in the middle of it, there was an act of pure survival instinct. Shaniqua's sister, Keosha, and Keosha's 12-year-old daughter got out, not through a door, but off the roof. They jumped. The mother broke bones in the fall. The daughter, almost unbelievably, came away with only scratches. It was from somewhere in that escape that Keosha made the phone call we opened this story with. The call to a relative, 7 words long, telling them the children were gone. It was not until 6:43 a.m. that officers located the victims inside the West 79th Street home. By then, Shamar Elkins was no longer in Cedar Grove. He was on the run. At 6:15, police received word that Elkins had stolen a car as he fled the scene, a carjacking. By 6:17, traffic units had eyes on the stolen vehicle. The pursuit moved out of Shreveport and across the Red River, heading toward Bossier City, roughly 15 miles away. At 6:29 a.m., officers confronted him. Gunfire was exchanged. Elkins, investigators said, was armed with a rifle-style pistol, and here we need to be precise about something, because the official record itself is not fully settled. There have been conflicting reports about exactly how Shamar Elkins died. Some accounts indicated he may have been killed by a law enforcement officer in that exchange. But a preliminary autopsy report concluded that Elkins died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigations into his death were still ongoing in the weeks after, and we are telling you what the record says, rather than choosing the version that sounds cleanest. What is not in dispute is the time. At 7:03 a.m. in Bossier City, Shamar Elkins was pronounced dead. From the first 911 call to the last breath of the man who caused it, the entire event lasted just over 1 hour. 5:55 to 7:03, 1 hour, 8 children, 2 women shot and surviving, 2 more injured leaping from a roof, a neighborhood that would never sound the same again. With the killer dead, the case did not close, because there was a second name to account for, and a question that the U.S. Attorney's Office decided someone had to answer for. The weapon at the center of the shooting was a .22 caliber Mossberg 715P. a rifle-style pistol. A small caliber handgun was also used in some of the shootings. And remember, Shamar Elkins, with his 2019 conviction, was legally barred from having any firearm at all. So where did the gun come from? On April 21st, 2 days after the shooting, federal authorities announced an arrest. Not of another shooter, but of the man they say is the reason Elkins had a gun in his hands. His name is Charles Ford, 56 years old, and, like Elkins, a convicted felon who was himself barred from possessing firearms.
Released a statement saying that they have arrested 56-year-old Charles Ford for being a felon in possession of a weapon.
According to prosecutors, Ford initially denied even having the gun. Later, he told investigators that he believed Elkins had stolen it from his truck. A court affidavit lays out a detail that is hard to read in hindsight. Ford said he had actually confronted Elkins about the missing weapon at some point before the shooting, but that when Elkins became, in the affidavit's word, offensive, Ford let it go. He let it go. A barred felon, aware that another barred man may have taken a firearm from his vehicle, he raised it once, got a hostile response, and dropped it. Federal charges followed: felon in possession of a firearm and making false statements to federal agents. Ford faced up to 15 years in federal prison on the charge tied to the gun. The U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Louisiana said plainly that with Elkins dead, the community would never see him face justice, and that holding the man behind the gun accountable was the only justice left to pursue. Both the ATF and the FBI moved in to investigate how a weapon ended up in the hands of a man who, by 2 separate legal prohibitions, should never have been able to touch one. Here is the detail that turns this from a single, unbearable tragedy into something larger. Shreveport, a city of roughly 180,000 people, was not blindsided by the category of this crime. It was, in a sense, expecting something like it. By the account of City Councilman Grayson Boucher, more than 30% of the murders in Shreveport are classified as domestic in nature.
I would like to also remind everyone that in the city of Shreveport, we have a true epidemic of domestic violence.
He described it openly as a true epidemic of domestic violence. This was not a secret. It was a known, measured, recurring feature of life in the city. And here is the part that stings.
For the past few months, the city of Shreveport and Caddo Parish have been working to provide resources for domestic violence survivors. However, the partnership between the city and the sheriff's office has come to a halt.
Just 1 month before the shooting, in March of 2026, the Shreveport City Council voted to withdraw from a partnership with the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office that would have operated a domestic violence resource center out of a new police substation. 1 month before a domestic dispute became the deadliest single-day mass shooting in Louisiana history, the city had stepped back from a domestic violence resource. The response from leadership was raw. Mayor Tom Arsenault called it a terrible morning and said it might be the worst tragedy the city had ever faced. The superintendent of Caddo Parish Schools urged the community to wrap its arms around its children and families. And the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, said something that has become the defining sentence of this case. Standing in Shreveport, he rejected the easy story, the story of a man who simply snapped. He said he could not place himself in the shoes of any father who could do this to his own children. And then he said the word that matters most.
It was just from one house to the next. I mean, it wasn't like a fit of rage where something snapped once. I mean, this was systematically.
It wasn't a fit of rage when he snapped once. It was systematic. Systematic. From one house to the other. A plan that, as we now know, had been spoken aloud 3 years earlier. Experts who study this saw the pattern immediately. Catherine Spearman, a researcher at Penn State who studies the overlap between domestic violence and child abuse, compared the Shreveport killings to another murder-suicide that had happened just 4 days earlier in a different part of the country. The similarities were not coincidental. Both men owned a gun. Both were in the middle of contentious divorces. Both had confided confided depressive, dangerous thoughts to people close to them. Her conclusion was simple and urgent. The systems around these families need to start recognizing these patterns as the risk factors they are, before the worst morning arrives, not after. In the days after, Cedar Grove did what grieving communities do. On April 20th, the day after, the same day Shamar and Shaniqua had been due in court, a prayer vigil was held for the victims, their families, and the neighborhood itself. Governor Landry and his wife announced that their foundation would cover the funeral costs for every victim of the shooting, all 8 children.
Louisiana Foundation will be paying all of the expenses for the funerals of each one of these children.
The Community Foundation of North Louisiana set up funds, one to help the survivors with what comes next, and another aimed specifically at domestic violence protection, so that some good might be forced out of something with none in it. The funeral service for the children was set for May 9th at Summer Grove Baptist Church. 8 children mourned together in a single sanctuary, and the survivors carry it forward. Christina Snow, shot 9 times, lived. Shaniqua Pugh, shot, lived. Kiosha and her 12-year-old daughter, who jumped from a roof to escape, lived. 4 women who will spend the rest of their lives inside the gap between who survived and who didn't. Mothers who will never stop counting the children who are no longer here. The hardest thing about the Shreveport Family Annihilation is not that it was random, it is that it wasn't. There was no stranger, no shadow, no unknowable evil that descended out of nowhere. There was a man whose own family had heard him describe this exact act years before he carried it out. There was a recent suicide attempt. There was a phone call about demons. There was a gun he was never legally allowed to hold, handed off by a man who decided not to push the issue. And there was a city that already knew, by its own numbers, that domestic violence was killing its people, and had pulled back from a resource designed to stop it 1 month before. Every single one of those was a door, and one by one, they were left open. 8 children went to sleep in a house full of family. Their names were Jayla, Shayla, Kayla, Layla, Markaden, Braylon, Kadarian, and Soraya. They are the reason this story matters, not the man who took them. So we'll leave you with the question that Shreveport is still living with. When the warning signs are this loud, spoken out loud, to family, to doctors, over the phone, whose job is it to listen? And what would it actually take to build a system that catches a threat before it becomes a timeline? If this story stayed with you, leave the children's names in the comments and subscribe, because the patterns in cases like this one only become visible when enough of us are willing to look at them honestly. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, you can reach the U.S. National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 88788. In an emergency, call 911. Help is available, and because leaving can be the most dangerous moment, a safety plan matters.